Welcome to the Privacy Mentor Podcast, your partner in the fight against identity theft, fraud, and cyber threats. I'm your host, Carrie. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're all joining us this week. We have a very special guest with us. We have the friend of Kursky Group, a friend of mine. We have Kris Coleman with Red5Security. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carrie. Pleasure to be here.
So Kris, for all of the listeners out there, what's your day job? Tell them a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Day job. So I am CEO and founder of Red5 Holdings, which is a family of companies, Red5Security, Red5 Privacy Labs, Red5Security Consulting, and as well as Red5 Real. And we do a number of bespoke offerings in the privacy, security, and resiliency space, specifically for high net worth families, for corporations, and for executives.
Fantastic. So I know you and I, we've had a lot of conversations about the online exposure that people have. And we've had some mutual clients where this was kind of the root of the problem, or at least what led to the problem. So let's talk about online exposure. Well, first of all, what is the online exposure? How can people be exposed?
Well, Carrie, as you and I have talked a lot about cyber and privacy and how cyber is a big word, right? So what does cyber mean to different people? And some people it's really IT. It's the wires and the hardware and the networking. And for some people it's online banking. For some people it's someone who stole their personally identifiable information. It's am I available? Can you see where I'm at online? And that's where we get into online exposure, right? There's so much information out there. And so when we talk to clients, it's one of those myth busting exercises, right? So they're like, no one knows who I am. I'm like, well, actually everybody knows who you are. And that's because there's this thing out there called the internet and everybody can find you. And what used to take people a long time to figure out now takes a very little amount of time to figure out who you are, what you do, where you live, and a variety of other things. So online exposure for us is, where are you mentioned online? What kind of presence do you have? Is it an active presence? Is it a passive presence? Is it mentions in media? Or are you, doing a lot of shopping or banking online? So now there's marketing databases that have, captured your information. So we've had clients come to us and say, I'd be curious from your background, you take your CIA, FBI background, see what you can find out about me. I'm like, hey, I'm up for the challenge. Let's try it. And they're like, you won't find anything on me because, I'm really careful. And I'm like, okay, it's good that you're careful. I wonder how your kids are, and I wonder how your grandparents are, and I wonder how all those people are being careful. And
everybody's connected somewhere.
Exactly. And what about all these vendors you work with? Are they careful with your information, right? So, we came back a week later and we're like, well, we know where you live. We know who your spouse is. We know where your kids go to school. We know where they stop and wait for the bus stop every morning. And he was like, what are you talking about? You had 7 days and you found out where my kids wait for the bus? Well, your PTA does not do a good job of shielding your privacy when it names your children in photographs with the street sign in the background, and it's published online in an unprotected database. And so we went on and on. I mean, we had reams of data about where this person lived and everything, where they banked, and it went on and on. And it was really surprising because they were a C-suite executive of a tech firm. And so they were very surprised about their online exposure. And where does all that come from? It's from the social media. It's from, where did you, go to get your coffee that morning? What's going on with your points system for aggregating points? Where does your Fitbit track you this morning on your run? And it goes on and on. So online exposure is really far more extensive than people usually expect. And we can thank our massive marketing machine for that, right? So it's going into the data aggregators. It's pulling data off marketing, off of shopping, off of banking systems. It's whenever you signed up for the frequent flyer accounts, or you signed up to do a quiz on Facebook, or whatever they do to pull you in, they're learning more about you every day.
So you mentioned data aggregators. Explain to the listeners, what is a data aggregator? Because some of them, that might be a new term and they've not heard of it before.
Well, absolutely. So, what's fascinating is, the new currency in our hyper-connected world really is data, right? That's what the world operates on anymore. It's the commodity that the planet's commerce works on. People talk about buying and selling data. People talk about the value of the information that you've left behind online as a marketing. Do you like red roses? Do you like white roses? Do you prefer Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks? Or do you want your local coffee? All those preferences, right, are valuable. And so these companies have set themselves up on the internet to just hoover up all the information they can. And it's everything about you. And people are worried about NSA or CIA or FBI tracking your every move. You need to be worried about the data aggregators. And that's what hides behind every website on the planet. So the data aggregators are taking in the information like, where do you live? What's your address? What are your preferences? What's your phone number? What cell phones have you had in the past? What addresses have you lived at in the past? They get into really some of the sensitive information that you and I have talked about as hints, right? So what are your security questions, right? Those security questions are validated through some of the information they find in data aggregators. Which of these 4 addresses, did you have you lived at in the last 20 years? Well, that's all pulled from data aggregator, credit reports, all these different groups that have information on you. So everyone thinks about, Axiom, Factual, white pages, getting into People Finder, different data aggregators are out there. There's about 15 that are really popular that pull the most data. And so one of the things we have people do is go into the data aggregators and figure out which ones have your information. And it's almost like a health check, right? You're like, I'm only in 2. Okay, well, you probably don't spend much time online if you're only in 2 data aggregators. But typically we get online and we check for a client and they're like, we're in all 15, we're in deep. They've got all our stuff. And like, yeah, that's not atypical for our society, for someone who's online banking and shopping and posting social media, et cetera. But we'd like you to be in a lot fewer. And of course, the natural next question is, get me out of all of them, right? What's the silver bullet, Kris? Get me out of all of them. And the answer is, we can get you out of all of them, but it's only going to last for a couple of weeks.
Right.
And then the internet is built to be resilient, right? So all the DNS servers, all the mirrored sites around the world, they don't want to fail and lose the value of the data that they have. So they always replenish, and they're always, resetting with all the data that you've had out there. So there's no silver bullet to get you out of all of them, but it does end up being sort of a privacy health check. And I'm gonna, on a regular basis, like eating a salad or going out and going for a run and staying fit, you've got to do all these healthy things for your privacy as well. So get yourself off the data aggregators. Do it regularly, right? Do it again each quarter. Take yourself out.
You bring up a great point. Right? And I agree with you on that. I love the privacy health check. I love that. I think that's a great way to explain it. But you really bring up a great point, because if you don't know what information is out there about you, you can't protect yourself. You can't protect yourself from the unknown. So I think that is a great tip for people, that they need to do it. Now, so just to kind of give an example for the average person, if they're just looking and trying to figure out what some of these data aggregators are, or at a very low level, trying to figure out their exposure, would it just be simply searching their name online and see if they show up in like Spokeo or any of these other things that come up? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's not that hard to find out. There are other ones out there. Spokeo is another big one. You find out if your information in there. The hard part is getting yourself out.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, oh, just supply your information and we'll take you out. Well, that just feeds the machine, right? It's like sending your address to the magazine companies and say, don't send me a magazine anymore. Thanks for the address. We're just going to renew your address in our database. And we took you out yesterday. Yeah. And so it's definitely this sort of perpetual machine. Some of these groups really make it hard, right? So now you got to fill out the paperwork. You've got to almost file it like a legal process. Some of them are easy, some of them are harder. They're all achievable, because the government has tried to help with this problem and make it achievable. So a lot of times the clients just say, Kris, can you guys just do it? Just take care of it, and then be that medical checkup for us, that privacy checkup for us every quarter. And we're happy to do that too. But a lot of families don't want to outsource that. It's a private thing, and they want to handle it. And sometimes their personal assistants or executive assistants can do it. But it does feel a little onerous once you get into it. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard.
Yeah. And again, all great points that you're bringing up here. And the fact that, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, is just because you take it down one time doesn't mean it stays down, because these are data aggregators. That means they're constantly scraping the web, trying to harvest the information to put it together in a database. So if they take the information down and your information pops up somewhere else, they scrape it and put it back in the file. So it is a constant, you have to do maintenance on it. It's not just, the Ron Popeil set it and forget it.
Right,
You have to do
right.
continuous maintenance on it. So if people want to, if they're interested in learning more about this and how to protect themselves, and especially, people that are C-suite or people that have a lot of exposure, because anytime people that are on boards or in high level positions, of course, their information's out there more than the average person, and they're a greater target because of the information that's out there. So if someone wanted to work with your company, how does that work? So if they come to you and say, Kris, I want to know what my exposure is, and if it's bad, I want to, put you on the maintenance plan. So what does that look like for folks?
Absolutely. So typically we put an NDA in place so that we're mutually protecting each other's information. That's really step one of almost every Red5 engagement, because we think that is important. And then once we have that, we say, okay, we're going to take the information you've given us. We know your identity. We don't need to get into necessarily the weeds on your PII, but we need to know who you are, right? Let's know your client. Okay, you're John Smith, Joan Smith. We take your information, and then we kind of get a read, right? So are you Bill Gates kind of profile, or are you Joan Smith and it's a small profile? Because it's different level of effort depending on what your social profiles look like. So then we give you a read on a price and say, okay, we can do an online exposure review. That's step one. Let's take a look at all of it. Because if it's not a big deal, it's a less level of effort, and it's better for you. It's less expensive, less onerous undertaking on the back end, easier to maintain. And now you've actually done yourself a favor by starting small, right? And you don't have a big exposure to begin with. So we'll do an online exposure review. We'll go through that process. Takes a couple of weeks. We'll give you a full read on everything we find. And I'll have to say, I'll put a little note out there that our analysts are fantastic. There are automated things out there that do this cheaper, quicker, but they don't catch it all. And we've tested our stuff against some of the others. So the human analyst is an important factor in this, and we've got a lot of those that have done this a number of times. So the OAR, the online exposure review, comes back to the client. They can see exactly what they're exposed. They can see exactly what kind of information is out there, and they'll get actionable recommendations from us. And one of the number one things is, now let's go get you out of the data aggregators, right? So now we know the totality of your exposure. Let's get you out of the data aggregators. You might be in 2, you might be in 15. Let's get you out of them anyway. Then it's up to the client to decide if they want to do it on their own, if they want us to take care of it. And so this whole first initial process, it's between 3 weeks and 4 weeks to kind of get it all done and done well. And then the maintenance is typically quarterly. We'll stay on top of it. What's interesting is we've had clients now for multiple years that have had this process. And we had a new one, had them come in recently, and they're like, do I need to do that again? I'm like, well, let's take a snapshot, right? You're a returning customer. Let's just do a snapshot. And you're like, you know what? You're much better off than you were. You've stayed down, right? You've, in a medical sense, you've avoided those risk factors to your privacy and your identity because you took those initial steps, and we're seeing the benefits of that over time. And your data aggregators, yes, they're still out there, but we're knocking them down again. But you're not in 15 this time, you're in 8. It's working. This process is working. And it's turnkey from the client's perspective. And you learn a lot about what you left open so many years ago on MySpace, or what happened to that LLC I started 20 years ago that had a website, and I never shut down the website. Where is that website? And we found some really interesting things that people had forgotten that were out there.
Yeah, and it is, internet, when it first started, people were just kind of doing things and signing up for accounts, and nobody even considered privacy because nobody even thought that people would be selling your information on the back end.
That's right.
And then you have people who set up these accounts where they download an app, use it once, but yet they still have information on them. So yeah, there are a lot of different things. And I'm sure that when people get that exposure, online exposure report from you, I'm sure there are a lot of jaw dropping. Because they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Or like you said, oh yeah, that was 10 years ago and I don't even remember it. So I think it's great that you have this service. And real briefly, I just wanted to touch on, because there are some other companies out there that you said they use a lot of the AI, the artificial intelligence, and they try to automate this process.
Mhm.
And they work with some of the major data aggregators, not with all of them, to try to remove the information. But I want to talk about, because the people that you have working for you, it's not like your average company. Let's talk about some of the pedigree of the people who are these analysts that do this.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. It really is a differentiator for us. We have from day one always thought that the human being is the most important linchpin in the entire analytical process. We're founded. I mean, my background is former CIA and former FBI. Worked for both those organizations, but I also benefited from, and I was a special agent at the FBI, and I was an intelligence officer and a security agent at the CIA. But I was always supported by the analytical wing of both organizations. And when those were the big brains, the analytical minds that were really crunching the numbers and digging deep in the research to help me solve the case, to help me work the intelligence operation or protect the VIP. And so we took that pedigree from the CIA analytical foundation and applied it to all of our new analysts that joined Red5. So we're not giving away trade secrets, but the methodology is absolutely rock solid. So the analysts are well trained in open source intelligence techniques, which are unclassified techniques that are used out there to gather information from open sources, the internet, databases on criminal records, legal databases, et cetera, and pulling county records and all those things. So they've got all these skills. But then they're able to actually use human intuition and analytical methodology to connect the dots, right? So it's not an AI sweeping through a field of data and going, it's 4, 5, and 6. That's the answer. And we're going through it and going, yeah, 4, 5, and 6. That's obvious. We get that. But the analysts are going. I remember seeing a reference to one in a previous field in an adjacent person's record. I have a hunch that they may be connected because they were in the same state. And so there's this analytical methodology. And then they do some research, they do some analysis, they key up key data fields and make the connections. And like, you know what? It's not just 4, 5, 6, it's also 1. And this is the value add that we have, right? So we will find things that the AI won't, and we'll be just that much better. And then we'll also be able to sit down like human beings and explain it to the clients and walk them through, because our clients are not, they're not unsophisticated people. They're very sophisticated people. They didn't get to where they are by being, laissez-faire about their privacy or their finances or their family affairs. So they frequently want to know, like, explain to me why. I want to know the why. And it's our analysts that are able to do that. So, well, this is why this was important. Of course, 4, 5, and 6 were important because those are major data sets that were inside the data aggregators. Anybody could have found those, no problem. But did you know? And then they walk them through the analysis and they're like, now I'm getting the bang for the buck, right? Now I'm getting the actual value from the human analysis that the Red5 associates and analysts actually create on a daily basis for our clients.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100% on that. You cannot take the human out of analytics. Right. AI only goes so far, but like you said, it's those little things that the AI is not programmed to look for that it's going to miss. And I don't care how advanced it gets with the technology, it's still that human factor. And especially when you have people that is their skill set, they are very analytically minded or right. Their mindset. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's a different breed. They look at things from a completely different perspective. And so I think that's crucial, and that's well worth the extra money, as opposed to just paying, a nominal fee for a database to search a database and then spit out a report that you kind of have to figure out. It's like when you go to the doctor and you get the test results back and you're exactly. Like, okay, is this good or bad? Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about, I know your team will help find online exposure and will help to minimize it as much as they can, and sometimes even eliminate some of that exposure. But what are some other things that listeners can do to minimize the exposure in the first place? Or if they just do a Google search of their name and they see things popping up, what are some very basic tips that people can do?
Well, we touched on this before and just lightly, but I think one of the things that people get drawn into is social media, and they get drawn into these different, quizzes, what is your spirit animal? talk to me about your astrological signs. Which of these things do you like better than the other? These are all just data aggregation quizzes, right? And they're feeding the machine that is really working against you. So while they may be fun and they give you that instant gratification that, oh, look, I'm a puma, like my friend was a puma, right? I'm a spirit animal. Okay, let's just take a moment and understand what it is we're putting out into the ether by answering these things on social media. So number one, I'd say just avoid sort of the extra activity out there that's really collecting data, even though it may feel like entertainment in the moment. Obviously, to also keep yourself out of data aggregators, you're registering for a number of sweepstakes, staying out of those kinds of online activities, I'll say, will keep you out of the data aggregators. I think from the perspective of personal information, I try to do as little shopping with my real email address and using those kinds of things. I set up a separate throwaway password and email address. So it's like, if I'm going to go shop somewhere, it's going to be acme12345 at whatever it is, and that's not my regular email address, right? And so I always know I can always ditch it, abandon it, destroy it, delete it, get rid of it. That way, my real address isn't ending up in a lot of these data aggregators. So there's a couple things that come to mind that just to minimize online exposure of what you're trying to protect.
Yeah, so try to minimize where you can, but for some things, it's out of your control. As a private investigation agency, we get access to a lot of these data aggregator databases, right, just like you did, doing federal work. Mm-hmm. And one of them, I remember when they first came out with this, and this was probably going back to about maybe 2010, maybe 2000, somewhere between 2008 and 2010. And they came out with a new search tool where if you entered, and of course we had to have permissible purpose, not like we could just randomly, willy-nilly, pick somebody and look up anything on them. But for a case we had, what this tool offered, it actually aligned with what we were trying to accomplish. And the tool was, if you enter the person's license plate number, it would bring up screenshots of everywhere that car and license plate had been found, with all the traffic cameras, the security cameras, all the cameras that are now out there. Right. And it was phenomenal. The case we had, we were trying to find someone was not supposed to be in a specific location, and we just ran that database, and there we had like 4 pictures, and they were all date and time stamped of the person being where they were not supposed to be. And we're like, okay, great, this case was just solved in 5 minutes. Exactly. Now what do we do?
Exactly.
It doesn't work like that. Usually you don't get those TV wins, but sometimes you do. But that was such an eye opener for me. I mean, I've always known about the rest of the data. Right. But the fact that it would bring up screenshots from various cameras, from various sources, and they could see your car actually in front of locations just because you entered the license plate number. So when we're talking about data aggregators, it's not just your name, your date of birth, your social. We're talking about everything and anything that is out there in the public view. So the more you can minimize what you're contributing to that, the better. And then for all those other things that you can't, I mean, it's kind of out of your control, but you just try to do the best you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating because that data field sits somewhere sort of uncorrelated. It that plate number may never be searched, right? That data is just sitting somewhere in a giant data center, and it's dumb data, probably in its static state. But once you as an investigator say, I want to see that, and I want to see how it is related to these other things. Now that data is alive, and suddenly, like, now it has a life. It's got connections to, this is Carrie's license plate, and it's also associated with going through a Starbucks drive-in, and it's also associated with, driving down or up and down 95 and going through a toll booth is another one that always catches people's attention. Like, how did they know I was doing 85 miles an hour on the toll road? Well, if you do the math and the physics around that, you went through toll booth 1 at 75, and you were really quite fast trying to get to the next one because that time was limited. And guess what? They were taking snapshots of your license plates all the way along. So it is a fascinating fact in our world, just the omnipresence of surveillance cameras and other technologies.
A tip that we like to share with our clients and also with listeners is that It's the Billboard test. Before you put anything online, whether it's social media, whatever, emails, whatever, if you wouldn't post it on a billboard on the side of the highway, don't post it on the internet, because in essence, it's the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So before you take a picture with your new car and it shows your license plate on the back, think about, stop and think and look about not what only is like what you want to see in the front, what's in the background.
Exactly.
How many times have we seen pictures of somebody at work and they're standing in front of their computer, like thumbs up, and then behind them is the sticky notes with all the passwords. And
exactly. Right. Yeah.
That's a whole nother discussion.
All seen those.
But yeah, so I'm glad to hear that there are companies out there like yours that do help, and not only find it and give the report, but help people understand what the report means, give them guidance and education about how to minimize going forward, and then help them to try to minimize the exposure that they currently have. So I think it's a great service that you all are offering. If people want to find out more about you, your company, and your services, where should they go?
The best stop is the website. It is www.red5security.com. That's red5security.com.
Okay. And we'll also have the link in the show notes, so that way you'll have direct access to it. So Kris, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing this, because I know you and I have had these conversations many times, and we're in this space, we know it. So we want to make sure that other people are well aware of what's going on. And we also have another episode that we previously recorded where we talked about a woman who requested her data file from Amazon. And what she found was terrifying. There were thousands of files, and they were, because she has a Amazon Dot, and she had like 2 Echoes, and she had smart light bulbs. They were all recordings of her conversations in her house that Amazon has on their database. And so after that, I was like, well, I use Amazon. Let me go pull mine up, because I always put all the settings on for privacy.
Right.
And some of the things, one of them was I have Amazon Prime. So of course Amazon Video, and it had the history of everything I've ever watched on Amazon Video going back to like 2017. And not only that, it showed how far into the movie I watched. Like if I watched the whole thing, or if it was like the first 20 minutes, it had like the timestamps on it.
Right. Oh my
and
gosh.
Here, I'm thinking, oh, I shut all that down. And even with that, not even thinking about, I'm just watching movies.
It doesn't go away.
Everything you're doing is being, Big Brother is here.
Oh yeah. No
Big
doubt.
Brother is here. Yep. And we're welcoming in by having these phones that we carry around in our pockets and everything we do. And that's a whole nother discussion about the phone companies are selling location data. And it's $12 billion industry, I think, when I saw the report that came out. So knowing your online exposure, it's key, especially if you want to reclaim your privacy and minimize your risk for identity theft, fraud, and cyber threats. So reach out to Kris and his team over at Red5Security, give them a call, have them do a report for you. You might be terrified, but they will be able to talk you off the ledge.
Exactly. We'll help you through it.
Yeah, and help you work through it so that you can minimize your exposure too. So Kris, thanks again. Anytime you want to come back, we'd love to have you, because I know you're a wealth of knowledge and your whole team over there. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure being here. Thanks for doing this, Carrie.
All right, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode with Kris Coleman from Red5Security. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did and learned lots of great new things. If you like this topic, join us next week when Kyle from our office here at Kursky Group, he's going to share with you his own experience about what happened when he searched his name online, what he found, and what happened when he tried to remove the information from the data aggregators. So it's a follow-up from the episode today. So make sure to tune in next week. And until then, stay safe, my friends.